If you want to take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 42, we're going to continue in our story of Joseph. We had interruptions for a missions conference, and then last week we had a special guest. But we're going to get back in our story of Joseph. I'll give you a very brief, catch you up to date for those who haven't been here for the last few weeks, and then we'll continue on in the story of Joseph. One of the most amazing Bible characters is this man Joseph. He just had a wonderful spirit about him, went through a lot of troubles, had a lot of trials in his life, but yet he didn't let it get him down. And he always had his faith in God. Went through some difficult times, like I said, but yet he didn't allow those difficult times to make him bitter. And so we're going to look at the life of, and continue to look at the life of Joseph this morning. And I'll have a word of prayer, and then I'll briefly bring us up to speed where we are at this part of our story. And then we'll get back into our story about Joseph. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we do thank you for this day. Lord, thank you for this week that we take as a nation and set aside a day where we honor those who have served in our armed forces and those who are currently serving in our armed forces. Lord, I just pray that you'd give a special blessing to those families of those who were killed this week in Fort Hood. And then, Lord, for those who are recuperating, Lord, I just pray that you'd be near and dear to each one of them. Now, Lord, as we take this Bible lesson today on the life of Joseph, Lord, help us not just to look at these lessons as history lessons, but Lord, help us to learn from them, from these real people who lived here upon this earth at one time, and you've recorded their lives in the Word of God for a reason, and that is so that we can learn from these people. Help us today as we study the Bible. In Jesus' name, amen. Hold your place there in Genesis chapter 42, and I'll just bring you briefly up to speed. Joseph was I'm going to leave out a lot of details just to get the main highlights to get us to where we are today so we can continue on in our story. The man Joseph in the Bible was the favorite son of his father. His father had 12 boys, and Joseph was his favorite one. Joseph had a dream, actually had two dreams, and in his dream, he dreamt that his family would one day bow down to him. Well, his brothers didn't like that. They were jealous of him. They hated him because he was his daddy's favorite boy, and then he told them about these two dreams that he had that one day all of his family would bow down to him. So one time his brothers had the opportunity to get rid of him. He was sent out to go watch his brothers in the field and check on them. They were watching sheep, and his brothers saw him coming, and they said, "Hey, let's kill him." And this older brother, Reuben, said, No, let's not do that. Let's just dig him in a pit and throw him in a pit. And then they saw some tradesmen coming across, heading on their way to Egypt. And one of the brothers says, "Hey, let's not do that. Let's sell him. We can get rid of him and make some money out of this deal at the same time." So they took this young brother Joseph, who they hated, who was his father's favorite boy, and they sold him to these traders who were on their way to Egypt. Well, Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he becomes the slave, and he works his way up in the ranks into the different ministry heads of the country of Egypt. He finally gets to the point where some bad things happen to him, and he ends up in prison. He interpreted two dreams of a baker and a butler in the prison, and those dreams came true. And then one day, the king of Egypt had a dream, and he dreamed that 7 cattle came up, and they were nice and fat and good and healthy. And after that, 7 other skinny little cattle came up. And then the Pharaoh had another dream where 7 ears of corn, beautiful ears of corn, came up. And then after that, 7 dried up, old shriveled ears of corn. So the king of Egypt said, "Hey, is there anybody here in our country that can tell me what these dreams mean?" And all the wise men, nobody could tell the king what the dream meant. And then someone said, "Hey, there's that young Hebrew boy, Joseph. He's in prison. He has interpreted dreams before, and they came true." So they pulled Joseph out of the prison, and they brought him before the king of Egypt, and Joseph interpreted the dreams to the king. And he told the king, he said, "You're going to have 7 years of good crops. After that, you're going to have 7 years of famine." And then Joseph went beyond interpreting the dream, and he told the Pharaoh, he said, "What you ought to do is during the 7 good years, when the crops are coming in good, take 1/5 of the crops and put them away. And then when the 7 bad years come, you'll have all this food stored from the good years, and you will have food to feed the people with plenty." And the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, said, "Hey, you know what? We need to put somebody in charge of this. And Joseph, you're a smart fella. We're going to put you in charge." And the king of Egypt made Joseph this little Hebrew boy whose brothers sold him off to these traders, and he ended up in Egypt. Now this young Joseph is the second in command in the kingdom of Egypt. Only the king, the Pharaoh, is above him. And so Joseph has food. And look at the last verse of chapter 41. Genesis chapter 41, verse 57, it says, "And all countries came to Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because the famine was sore in the land." So here's Joseph down in Egypt. Because of his ability to interpret this dream, that God gave him this ability of Pharaoh, now they have food, and they're going to survive this famine just fine. But all the other countries don't have that. And so now all these other countries around Egypt are coming to Egypt to buy food. Now look at chapter 42. It says, when Jacob, now Jacob is Joseph's daddy, back home. When Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look upon one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither to buy from us thence, that we may live and not die." And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, "Lest peradventure mischief should befall him." Okay, now, Jacob the daddy had 12 sons by 4 different mothers. He had 2 wives, and each wife had a concubine. Joseph, his favorite son, who the brothers got rid of and hated, he had one blood brother named Benjamin, who was the youngest. And so now the daddy Jacob needs food, and he hears about the fact that there's food down in Egypt. So he tells the 10 boys, remember the little boy Benjamin, and Joseph's already in Egypt, that makes 12. So he tells the 10 other brothers, he said, "Go down to Egypt and get some food, but don't take Benjamin with you." He said, "I don't want to lose Benjamin." See, the mother of Benjamin and Joseph was the daddy's favorite wife. And he was told, or he surmised that Joseph was dead. His brothers didn't tell him that he sold Joseph off into slavery. They just brought Joseph's coat dripping full of blood, and they told their father, they said, "Look, here's Joseph's coat." And the father assumed that an animal must have killed him. So in the father's mind, Joseph is dead. And now Joseph's only little brother, Benjamin, he doesn't want to lose him. So he tells the 10 other boys, he says, "Hey, go down to Egypt and get some food. Man, we're starving over here." So look at verse 4. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren. He kept back the youngest boy, lest peradventure mischief should befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn from those that came from the famine of the land of Canaan. And Joseph, now this is the brother that they sold off. Joseph's in Egypt now. He's worked his way up the ranks. He's the guy that's got all the food. They don't know who Joseph is because they don't recognize him, but Joseph recognizes his brothers. So look at verse 6. Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. Isn't that what Joseph told his brothers in the first dreams that he had? That one day you guys are going to bow down to me? Now, here we see Joseph's brothers coming to Egypt to buy food. They don't know who Joseph is, okay? He's now in Egypt. 20 years has gone by, so he surely has aged in 20 years. Now he's clean shaven like the Egyptians. He's probably dressed in very royal garments because he's the second in command. So they don't recognize their brother Joseph, okay? This is where the story gets really interesting. So here's the 10 brothers coming to Egypt to buy food, and lo and behold, the one that they have to buy food from is their brother Joseph. The one that they sold off into slavery, the one who they were trying to get rid of, who they almost threw in a pit and left him to die. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't recognize him. And this is where the story. And so they bow down. They think they're bowing down to some royalty in Egypt, but they're actually bowing down to their brother, just like the dream that their brother told him would happen. And then look at verse 7. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them. But he made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan to buy food. Now here, this is where some people, when they read the Genesis chapters 42, 43, and 44, they kind of get down on Joseph. They said, you know what? Why was he so mean to his brothers? Why didn't he just come right out and tell him who he was? Well, the truth of the matter is, these boys needed to learn a lesson. They needed to learn, and they needed to get to the point where they realized that what they did to Joseph was wrong. They should have never sold him off as a slave. They should have never plotted to kill him and leave him for dead. Thank God they didn't do that, because the older brother, Reuben, he's the one that talked the boys out of not throwing him in a pit, okay? But here's Joseph in Egypt, and his brothers come to buy food, but they don't recognize. The reason they don't recognize him is because he was talking to them through an interpreter. Look at verse 23. It says, and they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. Okay, so here's Joseph, their brother, dressed in royal garments. 20 years has gone by. They don't recognize him. He doesn't wear a beard like the Hebrews did. The Egyptians were always clean-shaven. If you look at the pictures of the mummies, you see the Egyptians are always clean-shaven. So they don't recognize Joseph. And Joseph says, why are you come? And they said, we came from the land of Canaan to buy food. And then look at verse 8. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and he said, ye are spies to see the nakedness of the land. So Joseph's giving them a hard time now. He knows who they are. They don't know who he is. So he's going to play with them a little bit. And he doesn't do this in a mean-spirited way. But he's going to bring them to the point where they finally admit that they did wrong. Joseph was a very wise man. And you know, the truth of the matter is, when you have somebody who's done something wrong to you, you should have a spirit of forgiveness towards them. Okay? You should be willing to forgive that person, and you should be willing to let it go. But the truth of the matter is, forgiveness does not happen until the person who has done wrong admits that they've done wrong and knows that they have done wrong and has come and asked for forgiveness. Okay? Now, as Christians, we should be in the spirit of forgiveness. We should always be ready to forgive if somebody comes to us in that condition. And Joseph was ready to do that, but he knows that his brothers have not reached that point yet. They have not reached the point where they realize they did something wrong. They've not gotten to the point where they're sorry about what they did that was wrong. And they've not gotten to the point where they're going to ask for forgiveness. So Joseph is playing a little game with them. Through an interpreter, he's asking them these questions. Why are you coming down here? And look at verse 9, he says, you're spies to come to see the nakedness of the land. You're come. So he's accusing his brothers of being spies. And then look at verse 10. And they said unto him, nay, my Lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's son. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. His brother said, hey, we're not spies. Now, they're talking through an interpreter now because Joseph is playing games with them. He understands them. He remembers his Hebrew language. But he's talking through an interpreter, and he's giving them a hard time. And they said, no, we're not spies. We just come to buy food. And look at verse 12. And he said unto them, nay, but to see the nakedness of the land are you come. Second time now, Joseph is accusing them of being spies. And verse 13 says, and they said, thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. He says, hey, we're 12 brothers. Okay, our youngest brother's back home with daddy. Remember, the daddy didn't want to send the younger brother because he didn't want a chance of losing the only last son that he thought in his mind of his favorite wife. So he says, we are 12. Here's 10. Our youngest brother in Egypt, and one is not. Well, now they're lying. Get the picture. They're telling Joseph that he is no longer alive. You know, and Joseph knows what they're talking about, but they're lying to this man. They said we're 12 boys. The youngest was at home, and one is not. Now, whether they meant that they assumed he was. See, they don't really know what happened to Joseph. All they know is they sold him off to these slave traders in Egypt. They don't know if he's dead. I mean, they're assuming so by the way they said one is not. But so here they are trying to explain their situation to the king, who's their brother Joseph. Anyway, so they said, one is not. And Joseph said unto them, that it is that I spake unto you, saying, ye are spies. Third time now, he said, no, you guys are a bunch of spies. And then look at verse 15. Hereby ye shall be proved. He said, okay, I'm gonna test you guys. He said, and here's how we're gonna do it. By the life of Pharaoh, verse 15, ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. Joseph is really he's tightening the screws on those guys. He says, I'm not going to help you at all until you get your youngest brother here. See, that youngest boy, Benjamin, that stayed back home with daddy, that's Joseph's blood brother from the same mother. And Joseph wants to see that boy. And Joseph wants to see his brother. So he's going to play a game with his brothers. He's going to say, hey, I'm not giving you food until you get your youngest brother come over here. He wanted to see his younger. That's sort of a touching part of the story to me, that Joseph here in Egypt wants to see his younger brother. So look at verse 16. He says, send one of you and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you, or by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. He said, all right, guys. He said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put you all in prison. I'm going to let one of you go back to your daddy, and you get that younger brother and you bring him here. And if it doesn't happen, that's going to prove to me that you guys are a bunch of spies. And so look at verse 17. And he put them all together into a ward 3 days. So now all the brothers are thrown into a prison for 3 days. I imagine Joseph was thinking in the back of his mind, oh yeah, you guys were going to throw me in a pit and leave me there? Let me show you what it's like. So he puts all of his brothers into prison for 3 days. They're in the prison. And in verse 18, Joseph changed his mind. He changes his battle plan. So in verse 18, and Joseph said unto them the third day, this do and live, for I fear God. If ye be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses. So he says, okay, he says, fellas, I've been thinking about this for 3 days. I'm going to change my mind. I'm not going to keep you all in prison and only send one of you guys home to get your little brother. I'm going to send a bunch of food home with you. So it's going to take a lot of you guys to carry this food home. So I'm going to keep one of you in the prison. I'm going to send the other 9 of you back home with some food for your families, and don't you come back and show your face up to me again asking for food until you bring that younger brother with you. And so look what happens, verse 20. But bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. Now look at verse 21. Now here is where Joseph brings his brothers to the point where he was trying to get them. Verse 21, and they said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. Aha! Hey, they finally are getting to the point where they realize that they should have never done that evil thing to their brother Joseph. And so they're talking amongst themselves. Joseph is standing right there, and he hears them talking. They don't know that he can understand them, because all this time Joseph is talking them through an interpreter, okay? But they're over here talking and said, oh man, we're in really trouble now. And you know, probably the reason this trouble's come to us is because of what we did to our brother Joseph. Now look at verse 22. And Reuben answered them, saying, spake not I unto you, saying, do not sin against this child, and you would not hear? Therefore, behold, his blood is required. Now, Reuben, the oldest boy, was the one who talked his other brothers out of just leaving him in a pit to die. Well, Joseph, for the very first time, is finding that out. Remember, Joseph is standing right here listening to these guys talking. They don't know he can understand them. And so Joseph is standing there, and these guys are talking Hebrew, and they said, oh man, look what we did. We did something bad to Joseph. Now all this trouble's coming in our lives. And Reuben says, I told you so. That's what he said here. He said, spake not I unto you, saying, don't sin against the child, and you would not hear? Reuben said, I told you not to do that. And so now Joseph understands what happened, that his brothers really were going to leave him in that pit, but Reuben is the one who actually got him to take him out of the pit. So look at verse 23. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them through an interpreter. Interesting. Here these guys they're spilling their guts. They're saying, oh man, all this trouble we have is because of what we did to our brother Joseph. Joseph's standing right there listening to them. And Reuben says, I told you guys not to do that, and you wouldn't listen to me. And that's why we got all these problems now. Now our brother, one of us is going to be kept in the prison, and we got to go back home, and we got to talk Dad into letting younger Benjamin come with us, and it's going to be a really trick to do. So look what happened in verse 24. And he turned himself about from them and wept. This is Joseph. Joseph, can you imagine how touched he must be to hear this? He's hearing his brothers finally admitting that what they did to their brother Joseph was wrong. And Reuben's finally telling them how that, he tried to talk them out of it. And Joseph gets so emotional over this thing. But he doesn't want to let them see that, because then they would kind of understand, hey, wait, this guy understands what we're talking about. So Joseph kind of turns away, and he starts crying because he's so touched. This is his brothers. He hasn't seen them in 20 years. Yeah, sure, they tried to get rid of him. Yeah, okay, they tried to throw him in a pit, and they tried to leave him to die. And yeah, they went back home and brought the bloody coat, and their dad assumed that he was killed by an animal, and the brothers didn't try to straighten the story out with their dad. But Joseph is touched by his brothers. It says he turned and wept, and then he returned to them again and communed with them, and he took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Oh, so now Joseph gets to choose which one of the 10 he's going to put in prison. He's going to send the other 9 back home to get the younger brother Benjamin. And what does he do? He doesn't take the oldest one. You think he would take the oldest brother. The oldest brother, the firstborn of the family. But Joseph just found out that that oldest brother, Reuben, is the one who tried to talk them out of killing him. So Joseph is going to spare Reuben the agony of being shoved into a prison, so he goes down and picks the number 2 son, Simeon. And so he takes Simeon and he bounds them before their eyes. So they all see Simeon, their brother, being cast off into prison, and Joseph is going to hold them in prison while they go back home and get their younger brother and bring him back with them to Egypt. So look at verse 25. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus he did unto them. Okay, now they brought money to buy corn to take back to Egypt. That's why they were there. Joseph tells his servants, he says, give them the corn in their sacks, but when you put the corn in their sacks, put their money back into the sack. In other words, Joseph is, hey, they're going back home. These guys are carrying food back to Joseph's dad, his younger brother, his other family members, his extended family, and Joseph wants them to go, so he sends them back with their corn, but he doesn't tell them, and he puts their silver back in their sacks, the silver that they brought to buy the corn. Then look at verse 26. And they laded their asses with the corn and departed thence. And as one of them opened up his sack to give his ass provender in the inn, he espied his money. Okay, so the brothers are on their way back home. They got their donkeys and they got all this corn. And so they stopped and they one of them wanted to feed one of his donkeys. And he opens up the sack of corn and he looks and he says, and he finds his money in the sack with the corn. And then look at verse 28. And he said to his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God has done to us? You see what happens when people who are guilty of doing something wrong, even something that good comes along, and they can't see it for good. Why? Because their guilty heart is piercing them. Here these guys have food. They're taking this food back home. They open the sacks, and the money that they were going to use to buy the food has been returned to them. Hey, that's a blessing, right? But they look at it as something bad. Uh-oh, this is something bad. And see, that's what happens when that old sin of guilt starts working on a person's brain. A person who has guilt on their heads, and a person who's known that they've done wrong, and a person who's not done anything about correcting that wrong, even when something good happens to them, they always are looking one over their shoulder and they think that something bad's about to happen, instead of saying, look what wonderful thing has happened. And so here they said, what is this that God hath done to us? And they came unto Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, and told him that befell them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us, and he took us for spies of the country. And we said to him, we're true men, we're no spies. We be 12 sons of our father, and one is not, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, hereby shall I know that you're true men. Leave one of your brethren with me here. Take your food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me, and that ye shall know that you're no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver unto your brother, and then ye shall traffic in the land. So they told their daddy, Daddy, we went to buy this food, and this guy thought we were spies, and he put us in prison, and he kept one of our brothers back, and he gave us this food, and he told us to come back and bring our youngest brother back to him. Look at verse 35. It came to pass as they emptied their sacks that, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And they both and their father saw the bundles of money, and they were afraid. They're saying, oh man, now what? All of these sacks of corn have their money put back into the tops of them. Oh, they're going to think that we robbed them. They're going to, all these bad things are going through their mind, instead of realizing that, hey, something good just happened. And so look at verse 35. Or verse 36. And Jacob their father said unto them, this is the first time their daddy is showing suspicion about these boys. He says, me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, Simeon is not, and you'll take Benjamin away, and all these things are against me. Hey, the daddy is finally getting, he's starting to smell a rat in this whole thing. And so he tells these boys, he says, you know what? You guys have been a lot of trouble to me. He says, Simeon's in jail in Egypt. Joseph is not. And now you want to take from me my youngest boy, Benjamin. And look at Verse 37, and Reuben spake unto his father, says, slay my 2 sons if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in which ye shall go, then ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. The daddy says, no, you're not taking Benjamin with you. Joseph's already dead. You're not doing this. And Reuben, this older brother, says, look, daddy, he said, let us take Benjamin. This is the only way we're going to get more food. The guy says we can't go back there until we bring Benjamin with us. He said, I'll tell you what, Daddy, I promise you that I will bring Benjamin back home. And if I don't, you can kill my 2 boys. And the daddy said, no. You guys have already caused me enough grief in my life. If you take Benjamin down there and something happens to him, you're going to cause more gray hairs on the top of my head and cause me all kinds of sorrow. So look at verse 43, or chapter 43, verse 1. And the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass, when they had eaten up all the corn which they brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, go again and buy us a little food. So daddy says, hey boys, go back to Egypt and get some more food like you did this last time. And verse 3, and Judah said unto him, saying, the man did solemnly protest to us, saying, ye shall not see my face except your brother be with you. He said, Dad, we've told you, we can't go back and get more food unless we take little baby brother Benjamin with us. We told you. That's what the man said, and he was real strong about that. And then look at verse 4. If ye will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy the food. But if you'll not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, ye shall not see my face except your brother be with you. And Israel, that's the daddy Jacob. His name was Jacob and later changed to Israel. So both times when they use these words interchangeably in the Bible, they're talking about the same man. This is the dad now. And when Israel said, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me as to tell the man whether ye had a brother? I could just see him saying, you stupid guys, why did you tell him you had another brother back home? That's basically what he's saying. He said, wherefore dealt you so ill with me? He said, why are you causing me so much problems? Why don't you, I could just see me, this is, okay, my son Dwight, you're here, you've been there, you've seen the wrath of your father. Why did you kids do this stupid thing? Why did you, And so here's Joseph saying unto these other boys, he said, why did you tell them you had another brother back home? Why are you causing this? Now I have to give up my youngest boy in order to go back and get some more food only because you blabbermouths told the king that you had a little brother back home. And look at verse 7. And they said, the man asked us straitly of our state and of our kindred, saying, is your father yet alive? Have ye yet another brother? See, Joseph put these guys in a trick box, He said, okay, Joseph knows who they are, right? These are his brothers, the ones who sold him off into slavery. Joseph knows he has a younger brother back home, okay? And so in order to get these guys to spit up the truth and tell the truth, he just not only asked them, well, tell me about your family back home. No. He gets real, he said, do you have a father back home? Do you have another brother back? I mean, Joseph is really zeroing in on these guys, and he's really putting the squeeze on them. Well, they don't want to lie to him because, look, there's a famine. These people are hungry back home. Their daddy sent them to go get food. If they get this king mad at them, or if they lie to him and he finds out later they lied, they're not going to get any more food. So these boys, as deceptive as they have been up to this point in our story, I mean, they're the ones who conspired against their younger brother Joseph. They're the ones who were going to throw him in a pit and leave him to die. They're the ones who sold him off to these slave traders so he'd be down in Egypt and they'd finally be rid of this guy who dreamed these dreams that we're going to bow down to him one day and all this kind of stuff. These guys were deceivers, but when they stood before this guy, look, they needed food. They weren't playing games. They were being honest. And when Joseph put these 2 pointed questions to them, is there your father? Is he still alive? And do you have another brother? They said, Dad, we had to answer him. He asked us specifically. He said, the man asked us, tell us whether we had a brother and about their father. So look at verse 7. They said, the man asked us of our state and of our kindred, saying, is your father yet alive? And have ye another brother? And we told him, according to the tenor of these words, could we certainly know that he would say, bring your brother down? They said, Dad, how did we know he was going to say, well, go back home and bring your little brother? He asked, is your father alive? We said, yes, our father's alive. Do you have another brother? And we said, yes, we have another brother. Dad, we didn't know he was going to ask us to go bring Benjamin home. We know you didn't want Benjamin to go. That's why you didn't let us have him on this first trip. But he asked us specifically, and we were just answering a question. And so look at verse 8. And Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we, thou, and our little ones. He said, Dad, we need food. Hello, we're starving. This guy's got food over in Egypt. He said he'll give us more, but we can't go back unless we bring our little brother Benjamin with us. And I'm sorry we told him, but we had a little brother back home, but we didn't know that he was going to make that part of the deal. Come on, Dad. Oh, so you're hungry? Okay, Dad, give us Benjamin and we'll bring you food. That's what they're telling him. He says, send the lad with me, we'll arise, we'll go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou and our little ones. So he's putting the pressure on his daddy. He said, hey, it's not just food for you. Look at all those family members we got to feed. The food is for you and it's for the little ones. Now, come on, Dad, let us take Benjamin with us and we can go get some food. And verse 11 says, and their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. Take the best fruits in the land of your vessels, carry down the manna of present, and a little balm, and a little honey, and spices, and myrrh, and nuts, and almonds, and take double the money in your hand, the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hands, peradventure it was an oversight. He said, okay, all right, you can go back. He said, but make sure you take money to buy more grain, and take the money that you took with you the first time that they put back in your sacks. We don't want any trouble with this guy. We need food. Don't play games with him. And so they said, take double the money and take a gift to him. Bring some of the fruits that we have here that maybe they don't have down in Egypt. And be nice to this guy and bring him some food. Even the dad doesn't know. They're talking about his brother, Joseph. And he's dying to be nice to them, but he wants them to learn what they did was wrong. So look at verse 13. Take also your brother and arise and go again to the man. And God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your older brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Now here, he says, okay. He says, go and take them. He said, but man, if something happens, there's nothing I can do about it. And then look at verse 15. And the men took that present, and they took double the money in their hand, and Benjamin, and they rose up, and they went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of the house, bring these men home, and slay, and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. When they saw the boys coming back, and Joseph saw little Benjamin, he told the cooks and all the people, he said, hey, go out and kill some animals, make a big meal. I'm going to feed these guys. And verse 17, and the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid. See, they're still scared. That guilt is still eating on them. They don't know what's going on, okay? They brought the little brother. They're wanting to get food. I'm sure they just want to get this food and say, hey, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and get out of there. Here, Joseph's bringing them to a meal, and he's cooking them a big meal. Now, remember, this is the second in command in the whole country of Egypt. Joseph is big time. He's only second underneath the king, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And so these guys are scared. Are they fatting us up for the kill? Why are we going to eat dinner with, we just want to come and get some food and leave. And this guy's bringing us into the palace. And these guys are cooking this great big meal for us. And look at verse 18. And the men were afraid because they brought into Joseph's house, and they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time were brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for bondmen and our asses. They said, hey, he's bringing us inside because he knows that we had the money in our side. Oh, this is going to be, you could just see those brothers talking with each other back and forth. This is not going to be good. He knows about the money. He knows we had the money back in our sacks. He's going to, look at verse 19. And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, O sir, we came indeed down the first time to buy food. And it came to pass, when we came to the inn, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money with us in the mouth of his sack, the money full weight, and we brought it again in our hand. And the other money have we brought in our hands to buy food, and cannot tell who put the money in our sacks. These guys they're saying, hey, look, about that money, we didn't know, and we opened the sacks, and we found this money, and so we're bringing it back to you, hey, be cool, take it easy, don't get mad. And look at verse 22. Or verse 23, and he said, peace be unto you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money, and he brought Simeon unto them. Okay, so he brings the other brother out of prison to this big meal. And the guy said, don't worry about the money. He said, we did that for you. He said, and that's your God taking care of you. You see, the guys are thinking that this is an evil thing that's happened to them. They don't understand that it is their brother, Joseph, and how God worked through Joseph's life. He's trying to do something nice for them, and they can't see it because of the blindness of that guilt that they have in their hearts. And so he said, don't worry about the money. He said, I had your money. He said, okay, go bring Simon out of jail, bring him to this nice fancy meal. And the man brought them into Joseph's house, and he gave them water. They washed their feet. He gave their asses provender. In other words, he fed all the animals that they brought with them to carry the grain and the stuff. Verse 25, and they made ready the presents against Joseph came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand to the house, and they bowed themselves to the earth. Ha ha, it's happening again. Remember, Joseph told his brothers when he dreamed those dreams way back when they were at home that one day you guys are all going to bow down to me. Well, the first time they bowed down to him, Benjamin wasn't with them. So Joseph's original dream was that all his brothers were going to bow down to him. Now Benjamin is with them. And what happens? They're getting ready to eat this meal. They're in there. They wash their feet. Simeon is bringing out of the prison. And Joseph is getting ready to come and join them. And Joseph walks in the room, and all of his brothers bow down to him. You see, God told Joseph that that was going to happen. And Joseph's dream came true. And now it's come even more true because now all of his brothers are there. And look at verse 27. And he asked them of their welfare and said, is your father well? The old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive? And they answered, thy servant our father is in good health. He is alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. 3 times. Now they're bowing down again. You see, Joseph told these boys about this dream, and they hated him for it. But the truth of the matter is, Joseph was telling them about one day you guys are going to bow down to me, and now it's happening. And look at verse 29. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom ye spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. He saw his brother Benjamin for the first time. He's been gone for 20 years. And he saw his little baby brother Benjamin. And oh, it just gripped his heart. The Bible says his bowels did yearn upon him. In other words, he was just overcome with joy to see his little blood brother Benjamin. And he started to cry. And he didn't want these guys to see him cry, so he turned and he went to his chambers and he cried for a little bit. And he comes back. And verse 31 says, and he washed his face and he went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. And they set on by him for himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men marveled at one another. Joseph sat them down at the table, and he put them in the order of how old they were. He started with Reuben and Simeon and down the line, all the way down to Benjamin. And these guys are looking at each other like, ooh, like, how did this happen? Here we are all lined up based according to our age. And look at verse 34. And he took and sent messes unto them before him. But Benjamin's mess, the food that he brought for Benjamin, was 5 times so much as any of theirs. And they drank and they were merry with him. So here, Joseph has still not revealed himself to his brothers, but he's getting ready to, but he's still got to bring them to a point where they realize what has gone on. And if you'll come back next week, we'll continue on with the rest of the story. The story of Joseph is a story of intrigue, but when we see and like I said, some people look at these chapters 42, 43, and 44, and they said, well, when Joseph's brothers showed up that first time, why didn't he just tell them who he was and forgive them? And Joseph and God used Joseph wisely to bring his brothers to the point where they realize, oh man, you know what? We did wrong, and we are sorry for what we did. But Joseph has to do that in a way so his brothers can come to this conclusion on their own without Joseph revealing. And so come back next week and we'll get into chapter 44 and 45 and we'll continue on with the story of Joseph.